Hey guys, Erin here. I suppose if you are watching this recording, it is because you are interested in getting an astrology reading. I wanted to make this recording so that you can get a little glimpse into what to expect for your astrology reading. And for starters, I want to say that I like to give my readings through Zoom. Okay. The reason for that is because through Zoom, we can connect through video and I can share my screen with you and show you everything that I am looking at. And not only that, but this doesn't cost you anything extra. I can record the session and send you that recording. The recordings are almost mandatory because the astrology readings are just way too much information for anybody to be able to process and remember it all. Okay. And also not only that, but I remember years ago when I went to go get my first astrology reading, the astrologer was wonderful. And boy, she was phenomenal. She just hit everything so right on the head. It was so perfect, was able to provide me with so much guidance. But the whole time she kept looking down at this piece of paper and I'm thinking to myself, what in the world is she looking at? How does she know these things about me? What is she looking at? And so I like to be able to show you guys this stuff so that you can learn for yourself. You can be able to see what sort of transits are going on in your own life. Now, I don't think anybody's really going to be able to get that out of one astrology reading, but after a few astrology readings, you can start to see transits for yourself. Okay. Now, one more thing to mention here. When I had that first astrology reading, I was so curious about what the heck was going on. I mean, I'd done some research about astrology before. I knew my sun and my moon and my rising sign, Pisces sun, Sagittarius rising, moon in Cancer. And I had looked up all the information about these things and was blown away by how accurate just, internet readings were. But after going to this reading with this astrologer, I told myself, I have to know this. I have to know this. And I ended up going to school for it. I went to the American Federation School of Astrologers, went on to Judith Hill's Academy for Astrological Medicine and other academies as well, the Syncretism Society, and really just dove so deep into this stuff. And I still am. I'll never stop learning. You can learn something new about astrology every single day for the rest of your life and still not know all of it. Okay. So what we're going to do first here is I'm going to pull up what we call a natal chart. Okay. Now, for starters, I work with what we call geocentric Western astrology. We're looking at a tropical zodiac here. And also for some of you who maybe are a little more advanced, I work with a Placidus and a whole sign house system. I like to look at both, depends on what I'm looking for. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But what we're looking at right here is something called a whole sign house system. Now, what we need to give you a really good astrology reading is your birth date, your birth location, and hopefully your birth time. It's extremely beneficial to know your exact time of birth. However, many people don't. It's very beneficial if you can at least know within a couple hours, then we can finely tune things. But I can still definitely give somebody a reading without knowing what time they were born, but it is massively beneficial for fine tuning things, knowing what time you were born. If you don't know what time you were born, there are ways to figure this out. I've never done this myself, but I have 3 clients who've done something called muscle testing, where they were able to, make a long story short here, they were able to figure out approximately what time they were born through muscle testing. So you maybe just do an internet search on that if you have no idea what time you were born, but at least within a couple hours is massively beneficial. Okay, so this is nobody's natal chart. This is not a real person. I just made him up. This person is called Anon Sunshine, and he was born on April 4th, 1984 at 11:40 a.m. Pacific time in San Francisco, California. Okay, so the way that this works is this is basically like a snapshot of the tropical zodiac from the time that Anon took his first breath of air, and it's based on his location. Okay, so first, when we talk about geocentric, Western astrology, we put Earth right here in the middle, or this is basically, just think about Anon right here. This person Anon is right in the middle of the chart. And these right here, these are all the celestial bodies on the outer part of the wheel. Okay, here's Venus, here's the sun, here's Mercury, the moon. This is something called the ascendant. Here's Pluto, Saturn, Mars. Okay, so you get the gist. These symbols right here are the symbols for the zodiac signs that these celestial bodies were beaming through when Anon was born. Now, and I call them celestial bodies because they are certainly not all planets. They are celestial bodies and also celestial points in the zodiac. Okay, so these numbers right here, they are the degrees of what, okay, for example, here's the sun. This is a symbol for the sun, and this is the symbol for the sign of Aries. And this 15 right here is representing 15 degrees. There's 30 degrees in each zodiac sign. The degrees are very important. I'm not going to go into any really depth on this recording because I don't want to overwhelm it. I don't want to make this a 2-hour long recording I don't think anybody's going to want to watch that. This is just to give you guys an idea as to what to expect for your astrology reading. Okay, so 15 degrees Aries, and this right here, these are the minutes. We're not going to focus on the minutes for right now. That's really for fine tuning things. Okay, so I generally start out with, I'm very flexible. If somebody schedules a reading and they want something very specific done, then I'm very flexible. But if it's your first reading, this is the way it usually works. I will start out by talking about the 3 most significant parts of the natal chart, which are the sun, the moon, and the rising sign. Okay, so let's just start there. Again, here's the symbol for the sun. And the sun was coming through 15 degrees Aries when this so-called Anon was born. Now, Aries is the cardinal fire sign. It is driven by cardinal. What I mean is it's got force, and the fire element means it's got energy. All the zodiac signs are either earth, air, water, or fire. Okay. And the fire signs have energy, especially Aries. This is what we call an exalted placement. The sun, this is its favorite place to be. The sun works with its greatest strength in the sign of Aries because the sun, brightest light in the sky, sign of Aries is like the warrior of the zodiac. It's ruled by Mars, and Mars is an aggressive energy, a very dominant and aggressive energy. Now, by no means am I suggesting that just because somebody is an Aries that they're going to be super dominant and aggressive, because there's so much more to the natal chart. But the sign of Aries in and of itself, the sun coming through the sign of Aries is an exalted placement. And these people generally tend to have really good energy. However, there can be a tendency to overexert themselves because Aries rolls the head and this energy just flies out the top of the head. Okay, now let's move on to the moon sign. Okay, and really I could go on and on and on for another 20 minutes just talking about the sun there, but we've got a lot to get through. The moon right here, this right here is the symbol for the sign of Taurus. When Anon was born, the moon up in the sky was at 22 degrees Taurus. Okay, now the moon influences our emotions. Okay, it's the ruler of our emotions and our moods. Going back to the sun, the reason why the sun is so important, and most people know their sun sign, the sun rules our inner being and our sense of identity. It's like our soul, whereas the moon more has a specific influence on how we emotionally react to things or respond to things. Okay, it has a lot to do with our intuition. The moon, it's like you can think of it as the sun is the father and the moon is the mother. Okay, and depending on what zodiac sign the moon was in when you were born is going to say a lot about how you handle emotional situations. Okay, so just so happens that, and I didn't do this on purpose, I just put in a random birth date, time, and location, and lo and behold, I pulled up another exalted placement. I said the sun is exalted in the sign of Aries, the moon is actually exalted in the sign of Taurus, because the sign of Taurus is very grounded and practical. And so the emotions can tend to be practical and reasonable emotions, calm and grounded. Now, that's not to suggest that this person just goes throughout their life just always being super calm and grounded, but certain emotional triggers, say the moon in the sign of Cancer is going to be a way more emotional placement than the sign of Taurus. Now, there's all kinds of aspects and stuff. Again, I'm really just giving you the simplified version here. Okay. Now, the next thing I'll talk about is the rising sign, or also called the ascendant. Using this whole sign house system, this right here is the symbol for that rising sign. Okay, now this, I'm not going to go into the astronomical stuff behind this. It's going to take too long. But what it means is the influence of the rising sign is our persona, our outward expressions, okay? The way that other people see us. This right here is the symbol for the sign of Cancer. So Anon was born with a 22 degrees Cancer rising. The sign of Cancer is actually ruled by the moon. You'll hear me say the word rules this, governs that, rules this, because that's the way astrology works. But the moon rules the sign of Cancer. Okay. Each and every zodiac sign is ruled by either one or two celestial bodies. Now, since the moon, if you think about it, the moon is that emotional motherly energy. She rules the sign of Cancer. So the sign of Cancer is going to be emotional. It's very receptive. Okay. Now, what this means is, especially just standing all alone here without any prominent celestial bodies to come to interrupt it, this Anon person probably has a very receptive personality. It's probably a softer personality. Now, we take all of these things and really they blend together. It's like they all go down our DNA and blend together, although each celestial body kind of influences a certain part of our life. Okay. So here we have this fiery Aries energy from the inside, this calm and grounded emotions, and a very receptive and maybe even moody persona. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go through and show you the houses. What I'm talking about are these things that look like a little slice of pie. What they are is the areas of our life where things manifest. Okay. They all kind of mean different parts of our life. For starters, let's start with the first house. Okay. Again, it's called a house. The first slice of pie over here is the first house, always and forever. If you're watching this on a big enough screen, you might be able to see that little number 1 right there. The first house is the house of self. It represents our self. It's a very, very important house in the natal chart. Now, everybody's going to have their rising sign come through here because that's the persona, that is the self. Okay. And a lot, like basically if you take the sun and the rising and the moon and the north node, I mean, really taking it all together, this shows us astrologers someone's purpose. It shows them, which direction to go in life. And the rising sign has a lot to do with that. So here, Anon is part of his purpose is to be receptive, probably be energetic and be a little bit of a warrior and a little bit of a tough guy because he's got that exalted Aries sun, but receptive and sensitive. I think Anon seems like a really wonderful person so far. Okay. Now, moving forward, let's go on to the second house here. The second house is the house of money, possessions, and values. Okay. Now, what we see here, this right here is the symbol for the sign of Leo. Leo is ruling the second house, the house of money, possessions, and values. And that said, that Leo energy is going to manifest through this person's value system. Can also have a lot to do with their finances. Leo's a very courageous energy, a very playful energy. And what's great is that this right here, the symbol is called the part of fortune, has a lot to do with where people can be fortunate. So Anon, especially coming through the sign of Leo, it's 29 degrees Leo. So it's anoretic. Again, I'm really trying to refrain from saying things that are going to confuse the heck out of people, but this is an anoretic degree. If it was a little further back into the earlier phase of the Leo season, probably be a little more fortunate. This could potentially lead into greed, but regardless, it shows that there's a good potential for financial flow. Okay. Now, third house, you can see that this house is empty and this house is empty and this house is empty. That's absolutely 100% completely normal. In fact, Anon here has a pretty balanced chart. A lot of people will have all the celestial bodies crammed up in one corner or just on one half of the chart. Anon's got them actually going around the whole chart, which is great. At most, I would say, actually, I don't know if I've ever seen a natal chart where there's a prominent celestial body in every single house, because that's just the way that the celestial bodies work. That's just the way they transit through the sky. Okay, so the third house is the house of communication. That does not mean that Anon is not going to know how to communicate just because he doesn't have any permanent celestial bodies in there. It's more about what's ruling it. This right here is a symbol for Virgo. Virgo is ruling his house of communication. That Virgoan energy is going to manifest through the communication styles of Anon here. This house can also have a lot to do with siblings and even short little journeys. Okay, again, there's so much more that if this is your own reading, trust me, we would be going to way more depth on each one of these houses. Okay, fourth house, this is the house of home. Has a lot to do with where we came from, where we spent our childhood, our parents, that sort of thing. Anon here, his fourth house, house of home, is ruled by Libra. Okay, now Libra is this very charming energy, very balanced energy. And this is going to manifest through his home. Like when Anon is at home, he's going to show this Libra energy. He's going to come through with this charming and probably quite balanced energy while he's at home, especially considering he's in Aries. Okay, now moving on to the fifth house. This is a very interesting house. I was looking at this as soon as I calculated this stuff. I looked at the fifth house. I went, maybe I should choose a different date and time, but I'm just going to roll with it because this is a lot to interpret. And I don't want to confuse anybody. So I'm just going to simplify this as much as I can. Fifth house is the house of children, house of creativity. It's a very, like the house of life's pleasures. It's a wonderful house of the zodiac. It's very fun and playful. I always kind of think of this fifth house as like when the instincts, when you see an adorable puppy or something like that, just the human instinct to feel good inside. That's what this fifth house reminds me of. But what Anon has ruling it is the sign of Scorpio. This is the symbol for the sign of Scorpio. Scorpio is the most intense sign of the zodiac. And here we've got Pluto, which rules the sign of Scorpio. And we've got Mars, which is the other ruler for the sign of Scorpio. This is a very intense fifth house. But then we've also got Saturn in here, which is restricting that energy. He's almost like, well, it could also have something to do with father. This could have something to do with being a father, with it coming through the fifth house, house of children and creativity. But overall, this is a very intense area of this person's life. Might even go into like sexual energies. The sign of Scorpio rules at genitalia. Okay. Yes. Astrologers know these things. Okay. But we're also, at least I know I am very, it's like, I just love being able to help people. I love helping people understand themselves. That is my true passion. Okay. Just because this stuff helped me understand myself so much. Okay. So there's no judgment here. This is absolutely about guidance and helping you help yourself. Okay. Now moving forward. Sixth house. This is the house of health and being of service. Anon's got the sign of Sagittarius ruling this here. This is right here, the symbol for Sagittarius, ruling his sixth house, which Sagittarius is it's about abundance and luck and philosophy and wisdom. Sagittarius is a wonderful energy, fire sign. But what he's got coming through here, again, this house of health and being of service. This right here is something called the South Node, which in the natal chart could be a little bit of a drain point, a little bit of like a leak where energy is going out. Okay. So there's a little, I basically would tell Anon, I really do suggest that you be very careful with your physical health. This sixth house has a lot to do with physical health. Okay. And again, there's so much I could say. I'm being very choosy about which things to talk about. This right here is Uranus, which can create abrupt changes and so many other things, but there could be abrupt changes that go on with Anon's health, or maybe about the way that he is being of service. Sixth house is the house of health and being of service. Okay. Seventh house, this is the house of relationships and partnerships. Now, what we see here is we see Capricorn. This is a symbol for Capricorn ruling this seventh house. Now, there's pros and cons to literally everything in astrology, every celestial body, every aspect, every sign, every house. There are pros and cons to it. The sign of Capricorn is wonderful for responsibilities. It's got this very practical, it's an earth sign, but it's also cardinal. So it's a strength and ambition to move forward, but it's all about responsibilities and like earthly, mundane responsibilities. But it's ruled by Saturn, which is the ruler of time. Now, with all that said, this person, Anon, may have like restrictions when it comes to relationships, especially like growing up and that sort of thing. But what he's got in here is Neptune in Capricorn, which is an interesting placement in and of itself. And he's got Jupiter in Capricorn. Now, I'll just summarize it this way. Neptune is a very, very spiritual energy, as is Jupiter. Jupiter is the great benefic, and it really does have a lot to do with spirituality, but more in the aspect of faith. Okay, abundance, luck, and faith, but also very philosophical and wise and spiritual. Together, these guys are very, very spiritual. This person very well could have very spiritual relationships. And what's lovely here with that sign of Capricorn, even though that Capricorn energy could restrict it, and also I was going to say Jupiter really struggles in Capricorn. Jupiter really has a hard time in Capricorn because Jupiter wants to influence abundance, but Capricorn restricts it. But what's wonderful here is that this person, Anon, could have a very long relationship, like a lifelong partner, marries, whoever he fell in love with from a young age, and they're together forever. With that sign of Capricorn, Capricorn can do that, ruled by Saturn, the ruler of time. Okay, moving forward, 8th house. This is the house of transformation and death and rebirth. Like there's a lot of little different descriptions for these houses, and there really is a lot more to them. But again, I'm just trying to summarize this. 8th house is like this house that has to do with really a death and rebirth process, not necessarily just death, like this person's dead, but rather the process of a death and regeneration process, like cells dying in the body and making room to regenerate them. This 8th house can have to do with occult studies. 8th house can have to do with sexual energy. But we don't see many prominent celestial bodies coming. When I say prominent, if I was to pull up all the asteroids and centaurs and all sorts of things, the chart would be too overwhelming. But there could be some asteroids or centaurs or really any other little weird things that could be coming through this 8th house. We're just working with the prominent celestial bodies. I won't be able to go into asteroids and centaurs in your first reading. Second or third reading, we can get really into depth with that stuff. But regardless, what's wonderful about this 8th house placement is that he's got it ruled by Aquarius, which Aquarius is the sign that can detach from the emotional stuff for the purpose of understanding things from a higher level of truth. The sign of Aquarius wants to understand things from an intellectual perspective and doesn't want to be attached to the emotions, okay? Which that's great for the 8th house because that 8th house can be very intense. Transformational processes, that's what this 8th house is all about. And those are usually not easy processes. But this sign of Aquarius, this energy would manifest through they're like, okay, well, how do we understand this from an intellectual perspective rather than emotional? Okay, moving forward here, the 9th house. This is the house of higher learning and advanced knowledge. Wonderful placement here. This right here is the symbol for the sign of Pisces. So Pisces is ruling Anon's 9th house, house of higher learning. Pisces is this very spiritual and mystical energy ruled by Neptune down here, Neptune and Jupiter, really. Neptune and Jupiter are what give Pisces this super flowy, spiritual, mystical energy. Now, that said, and also the sign of Pisces is very much associated with psychic capabilities. So the psychic capabilities can come through, manifest through the area of life that really has to do with higher learning and advanced knowledge, philosophy, even long distance travel. But even more importantly, what Anon has in here, this right here is Venus coming through. This is another exalted placement. Oh my gosh, we got an exalted sun, an exalted moon, and an exalted Venus. We've got Mars in its own home. Again, I'm trying not to confuse you guys, but this is where Venus works with her greatest strength. She loves to be in the sign of Pisces because Venus is feminine. Venus is about what we're attracted to. In fact, you can think about it this way. Venus is like the feminine side of relationships. Mars is the masculine side, the animal passion, the desire. Okay. Where Venus is more about romance and snuggles. Okay. And also Venus has a lot to do with what we're attracted to. Because Venus is in this 9th house, this person, Anon, may be very attracted to higher learning and advanced knowledge and in a very spiritual way. Okay, now, and maybe can psychically tap into things that, ancient wisdom or ancient knowledge or ancient civilizations, what they were attached to. Okay, moving forward. And this is the 10th house. This is the house of career and public life. So what Anon has ruling this house is the sign of Aries. This is where his sun comes through. Now, this is great. Okay. I actually did, when it came to just finding a natal chart to work with, I did intentionally put 11:40 a.m. because I knew that would put the sun up here in the 10th house. And this one's fun to describe because people with their sun in the 10th house tend to be very driven for public appearance and for career. Not to suggest that it's always easy for people who have their sun in the 10th house to have successful careers, but they're usually very driven for it. And an astrology reading can help somebody get through super, challenging situations when they're trying to have a successful business. Okay. So this, with your sun in the 10th house, again, it's going to make you very career driven, especially in the sign of Aries. But then we've got this guy right here. This is called the MC, also called the midheaven. This really represents Anon's, like him specifically, his career, what he's going to be driven to. Not everybody gets to have their MC come through the house of career and public life. So this just amplifies what I just said. This person, Anon, is probably very, very career driven, especially looking at these aspects here. Wow. I'm just realizing some stuff. I'll get to the aspects after we get through these houses. Okay. Moving forward, 11th house. This right here is the house of associates and hopes and wishes. What we've got ruling it is the sign of Taurus. There's a symbol for Taurus. So that Taurus energy is going to manifest through the people that Anon is associating himself with and who he's kind of connecting with to, go on a mission with, the people who support his goals, that sort of thing. And it's got to be a mutual support. That's what this 11th house is all about. And the sign of Taurus is coming through here for Anon. So what we've got here is Mercury in Taurus. Okay, Mercury rules our consciousness. Also has a lot to do with our communication skills. So as I mentioned down here, there's a house of communication. There's a house of communication. There's a sign of communication. There's a celestial body that influences communication. This right here is Mercury, which again has to do with our communication. I mentioned earlier that Anon would communicate with like a Virgoan twist. This is a sign of Virgo. Virgo's like very analytical and very can pay very close attention to detail, but can also is super nice. It's actually a really like nice energy, friendly energy. I've never met a rude Virgo. I maybe a little bit, but I've never met a jerk, I should say. I've never met a jerk Virgo, just a nice energy, but it's all about health and being of service. The sign of Virgo. That energy would kind of come through with his communication skills, but then he's got Mercury in Taurus, which Taurus is this slow, practical, grounded energy. And so this would slow down the consciousness. In fact, this is probably a really good placement for his Mercury since Virgo, that mutable energy of Virgo coming through their 3rd house. This can be very busy. Okay. But Mercury Mercury in Taurus can slow it down. Now, again, I have already caught myself several times going off on tangents that people are not going to understand unless I was giving you your astrology reading and being able to break all these things down. So to make sense of it all for you. Now, moving forward here, we have the moon that we mentioned earlier is exalted, working beautifully in the sign of Taurus. And what we've also got in this 11th house is Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer, has a lot to do with wounds from early childhood. Now, this 11th house, this house of associates, hopes and wishes, this is a very important house for Anon. This is very important. His Mercury is in there. His moon is in there. His Chiron is in there, even just for he'll heal better with connected people who will support that and him supporting them. Like emotional support, especially emotional support, since his moon is in there. He may even rely on associates for emotional support, although his emotions are probably, again, pretty steady coming to that sign of Taurus. But who he's networking with is very, very important to Anon. Okay, now 12th house. This is sometimes called the house of karma, spiritual debt, sometimes even called the house of secrets and sorrows. Really what this house is a very, very spiritual house, extremely spiritual house, has a lot to do with our mental health and spiritual practices. Now, what Anon has coming through here, well, first of all, he's got Gemini ruling it, which is really nice, actually, because Gemini is another one that's not super emotional. Not, again, not to suggest if you're a Gemini and you're thinking, well, I'm emotional, it's probably because maybe your moon is in Pisces or something like that. But overall, the sign of Gemini does not get attached to emotions. This is another one that really, it's about intellect. In fact, it's a highly, highly intellectual energy, the sign of Gemini is. And so understanding the, emotional sort of, this 12th house can definitely be emotional, understanding emotions and spirituality and mysticism and all those sorts of things. Anon here is taking it, that's again, another spot where he's taking it to an intellectual perspective rather than an emotional one, or, getting too deep into things. But let's mention this right here is called the North Node. Now, when I give you a reading, you better bet we're going to spend a long time talking about your North and South Node, because it's just a shame nobody even knows what they are. They are extremely important in giving you guidance in the direction you want to go in life. Now, with Western astrology, this North Node is sometimes referred to as destiny. I don't know if I necessarily entirely agree with the word destiny, but it's more like the direction we want to be going in. That where our North Node is in our natal chart has a huge impact on our purpose, what we're meant to be doing here. Okay. Now, coming through the sign of Gemini, it's like he's meant to become more intellectual and really focus on being the student. We'll just leave it at that. And very possible communication skills. Remember I mentioned there's a sign of communication. This is the sign of communication. Gemini is, but it's also, again, the student and always is wanting to learn and understand things. So it is meant to learn all these things and maybe communicate about it, but it's coming through this, it's almost like, geez, Anon was meant to experience some seriously spiritual karma, but understand it from this intellectual perspective. Now, again, there's so much more I could go into on that. I just buzzed through that as fast as I could, so I don't bore anybody. But the next thing I need to touch on briefly is these lines that go through the middle of the natal chart. Basically, what they are is they're called aspects, but really what they are, they're like connections or communications that were being made between celestial bodies up in the sky when Anon was born. For example, this right here is, again, Venus, and this right here is Mars. This blue line, this is fantastic. I can't believe I just pulled this chart out of the sky. This blue line is a harmonious connection between the influencer of love, like the feminine side of relationships, and down here, Mars, the aggressive side of relationships. They're harmonizing. They were having a lovely conversation at the time of Anon's first breath. These green lines can indicate opportunity. What celestial bodies they're, the conversation between these guys, there's opportunity coming from there. These red lines can be challenges, but when the challenges are overcome, there's rewards. It's way better to have these challenges. This is called a square, this red line called a square. It's way better to have a challenging square than to not, because when we overcome those challenges, there are rewards for us. There's also some inconjunct energy going on here, which is sort of a blind spot conversation going on. But again, I'm not going to go into all those details until we are in your astrology reading. Now, what I briefly am going to do is pull up what we call the transits, just to briefly show you what transits are all about. Now, the screen just changed, and this happens all the time when my clients, they'll see the screen change. They're like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? It looks scary because it changed. But it's really not that simple. I mean, literally not that difficult. Okay, it's actually quite simple with some practice. This inner wheel right here is the exact same thing that we were just looking at. This is Anon's natal chart. Here's the sun. Where's that? The sun in the 10th house, and there's this north node coming. This exact same thing, what we're just looking at, except now it's smaller and it's inside the bigger wheel. This bigger wheel is where the celestial bodies are, the ones that are up in the sky, where they are in accordance to Anon's natal chart. So this is how astrologers can see what's going on in people's lives and where they're getting support from the celestial energies, where there's energy going out of their life, where to be letting go of things, where to be putting your focus and your energy towards at that time. Okay, so trying to decide how deep I should go into this. Everything goes around the zodiac this direction. Everything basically goes counterclockwise through the zodiac unless it's in retrograde. If it's in retrograde, then it moves forward. So if you can just think about, here's Anon right here, standing there, his permanent frequency. And then around him, these celestial bodies are constantly moving, giving him certain situations to grow from, certain wonderful, beautiful, harmonious situations, opportunity, all these things. These are what's causing it. And also we go through several different types of progressions. I'm not even going to go, generally speaking, I don't have time to go into people's progressions in the first reading, unless I see something that's really outstanding. So that's a whole nother story. These are transits, the things that are up in the sky, they're showing up right here. And this is as of today. What is today? Today's May 16th, 2022. Okay, so let's just talk about, let's say where the sun is. We're going to make this as simple as possible. Here, this is right here is the transiting sun. Today, the sun, when I say transiting, I'm talking about the ones up in the sky. If I say natal, I'm referring to the ones that are in your natal chart. So the transiting sun today is at 26 degrees Taurus. It's Taurus season. Okay. Now, again, Taurus is that super grounded, calm energy. It actually has a lot to do with when things really kind of start growing. Aries season is spring. Now we're a little later into spring. My garden is growing like, just magnificently. I'm very excited. I love this time of year. But every year, this time of year, the sun is going to be transiting through Anon's 11th house, that house of associates and hopes and wishes. There's so much more I could say right here. This right here is a north node. We just had an eclipse yesterday. So the nodes are right next to the sun or the moon, depending on what kind of eclipse it is. But this right here is a north node. Energy is coming in and feeding, since it's right next to the sun, he is being fed support through this house of associates and hopes and wishes. That's where I would, honestly, usually what happens is, as I can see what area of your life is, probably most prominent at the moment. And before you even tell me, I'll say something like, let's see, do you want to focus on associates? You want to focus on people that you're networking with? Or, oh, gee, there's something going on with your house of career. Do you need to talk about career? And that's how it works. Okay. Now, again, I could go on and on and on and on. I could talk about Uranus right here, making some abrupt changes to the people that he's networking with. I could go on about how the South Node is going through his 5th house, which is already a little bit challenged. So there's energy being pulled out of that life's pleasures and the creativity. That's what the South Node does. There is definitely, you can see up here, the 10th house transiting Jupiter just entered into there. Jupiter again brings abundance and wisdom and philosophy and faith and luck. Jupiter can do some weird things too sometimes. When there's certain things going on with Jupiter, it's not always about abundance and luck for Jupiter. If he's really struggling, if he's right next to Saturn or going through the sign of Capricorn or making some really harsh aspects, then Jupiter struggles. But for the most part, Jupiter in and of itself wants to beam out abundance and luck and adventure. So here's Jupiter that just popped in the sign of Aries. He does pretty good in the sign of Aries. It's very fiery, hot energy. I see this as freedom. He probably, Anon is about to experience a transit next year where he would want freedom from being held down by a boss sort of thing. But he's also got Chiron going through his house of career. So he's working, maybe there's something going on with healing there, or maybe he's helping somebody who he works with do some healing process. Venus is going through there. That's softening energy that has to do with the career. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. I think I covered the most significant things. Again, we could go into progressions, we could go deep, deep, deep into your chart, but now hopefully you can see why I really recommend, if it's your first time getting a reading, especially, ever, if you've had astrology readings in the past, then maybe a half an hour or an hour long reading would be just as beneficial. But if it's your first reading, I highly recommend getting the 90-minute reading, but don't feel required to. You can schedule any length of reading with me, no matter if it's your first time or not, and we will find a way to make sure that you massively benefit from the astrology reading. Okay, so I really hope I made sense to that. If you want to schedule a reading, there's on my website, there's a link right at the top that I think it just says book here, and you can click on that link and schedule the reading straight through my website. If you don't see anything available in my calendar, let's say you live on the other side of the world and you're in a very different time zone than me, and what I offer for office hours is not available for you unless it's like 3 o'clock in the morning for you. Just send me an email, because I can be super flexible with my business hours. Generally, I work between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific time, but I can be flexible with that, especially for the people who are on the other side of the world. Okay, I do hope to hear from some of you guys.